The moment your old life stops feeling like home. Imagine for a moment that you wake up on a Tuesday. The sunlight touches the wall in the exact same spot it did yesterday. The coffee machine hums with its familiar rhythm. The commute is the same as it has been for years. Your partner reaches for your hand in bed, or your phone pings with the same professional demands from the same people. Everything is objectively identical to the life you lived a week ago, yet something profound has shattered. You look at your surroundings and feel a sudden, visceral, and unshakable sense of being a stranger in your own house. The conversation you have engaged in for years now feels like a performance you no longer wish to cast. The job that provided security now feels like a cage you can no longer justify occupying. The habits that once dulled your stress now offer no comfort at all. What has happened? You have not necessarily experienced a tragedy or a stroke of good luck. You have not been fired, nor have you received a sudden promotion. You have simply arrived at a threshold where your internal capacity to tolerate the status quo has vanished. This experience is one of the most disorienting and quietest crises a human being can undergo. It is the moment when your awareness expands beyond the boundaries of your current life. We are taught to believe that transformation is a loud event. We expect it to be signaled by an external catalyst, such as a breakup, a relocation, or a career change. We wait for the universe to tap us on the shoulder with a clear sign or a closing door. Yet, for many of us, the most significant shifts begin in the dark, silent interior of our own minds. It starts as a growing, quiet, and persistent irritation with the familiar. You find yourself unable to tolerate the emotional neglect you once rationalized as just the way things are. You become incapable of swallowing the compromises that used to feel like necessary sacrifices for peace. The version of yourself that you have defended, protected, and carefully curated for years begins to feel like a costume that has grown far too tight. This book is an exploration of that exact moment. It is for the person who feels that they have outgrown something, yet cannot see the horizon of what comes next. It is for those who are currently standing in the strange, uncomfortable, and often lonely space between a life that no longer fits and a future that has not yet materialized. There is a widespread fear that this feeling is a sign of instability. We often interpret this sudden intolerance as ingratitude or confusion. We tell ourselves that we should be content with what we have built. We worry that we are becoming reckless or difficult. However, the premise of this work is that your discomfort is not evidence that your life is falling apart. Rather, it is evidence that you are evolving. Your awareness has grown, and it can no longer be contained within the narrow, outdated parameters of your previous identity. When you can no longer tolerate a situation, it does not always mean you must burn everything down today. It means that the old ways of existing are no longer compatible with the person you are becoming. This period of transition is a psychological and spiritual threshold. It is a necessary stage of human development. When the external world remains stagnant while the internal world accelerates, friction is inevitable. That friction is what you are feeling right now. Throughout these pages, we will navigate the complexity of this shift together. We will examine why we cling to the familiar even when it hurts. We will discuss the psychological reality of our nervous systems and why they often crave the very patterns that stifle our growth. We will look at why our relationships often feel strained when we begin to set new standards for our self-respect. We will also explore the practical reality of living through this transition without losing our footing, ensuring that we move forward with wisdom rather than impulsive reaction. By the end of this journey, you will understand that transformation is not something that happens to you from the outside. It is a process of reclaiming your own authority. You will learn to distinguish between the fear of the unknown and the genuine call of your own evolution. You will see that while this process can feel like a loss of your old self, it is actually the beginning of an honest life. You are not failing because you are no longer satisfied. You are not broken because you can no longer pretend. You are simply preparing to inhabit a life that requires a higher version of your own integrity. It is time to stop apologizing for your growth and start listening to the signals your soul is sending. The discomfort you feel is the alarm bell of your own potential. It is time to understand what you can no longer tolerate, so that you may finally discover what you are meant to build. The path forward begins not with a leap into the void, but with the quiet acknowledgement that the walls of your current life are no longer strong enough to hold the truth of who you are. Let us begin to peel back the layers of this transformation, starting with the very first sign of your own awakening, the realization that comfort is no longer. Chapter 1, the first sign of change is often discomfort. Most of us spend our lives waiting for a cosmic green light. We assume that before we move into a new version of ourselves, we will receive some form of validation, clarity, or external permission. We imagine that change will arrive in the form of a clear, bright idea or a perfect opportunity that aligns with our goals. We wait for a sense of confidence to wash over us, confirming that we are ready to leave the old life behind and step into the new. But the truth is rarely so convenient. Transformation seldom announces itself with fanfare or a blueprint. Instead, it usually announces itself through the one thing we spend our entire lives trying to avoid: pure, unadulterated, persistent discomfort. When we talk about the beginning of change, we often mistake the starting signal. We think that feeling peaceful, excited, and confident is the sign of a new beginning. We think that if we feel anxious, agitated, or tired, we must be doing something wrong. But often, the very first sign of your own growth is not a feeling of joy. It is a feeling of irritation. It is the sudden, nagging sense that the clothes you are wearing no longer fit, the furniture in your room is in the wrong place, or the conversations you have with your closest friends are draining you in ways they never did before. Consider the nature of growth in the natural world. A seed does not bloom by remaining comfortable in its shell. The shell must crack. The pressure from the growing sprout inside becomes so intense that the outer container can no longer withstand the force of life pushing against it. That cracking is not a sign of failure. It is the essential process of becoming. In our own lives, we are often the seed and the shell simultaneously. We want to grow, but we want to remain protected within the structures we have spent years building. We want evolution, but we want to keep the status quo safe. This creates a psychological tension that manifests as discomfort. You might notice it in your daily routines. Perhaps you have always loved your morning ritual of checking the news, but lately, it leaves you feeling depleted. Perhaps you have always been the person who listens to everyone else during dinner, but tonight, you find that you cannot sit through another hour of one-sided venting. You feel a physical resistance in your chest. Your shoulders tighten. You want to speak up, but you do not know exactly what to say. You feel restless, as if you are waiting for something, but you have no name for it. This is the friction of expanded awareness. It is important to realize that your external circumstances have not necessarily become objectively worse. Your job duties are the same. Your partner is the same person they were yesterday. Your bank account is the same. But your internal awareness has expanded, and it is now projecting onto your environment a set of new expectations. You are no longer the person who could ignore the lack of fulfillment. You are no longer the person who could endure the lack of challenge. When your consciousness shifts even 1 degree, the world around you appears distorted because you are no longer viewing it through the same lens. Many people respond to this initial discomfort by trying to numb it. They increase their intake of distractions. They lean harder into their habits. They look for external reasons to explain their internal agitation. They blame their partner for being boring. They blame their boss for being incompetent. They blame their environment for being stagnant. While there may be validity in those observations, the root of your current unrest is not just the external situation. It is the reality that you have outgrown it. If you were not growing, you would still be perfectly comfortable in that same environment. You would still be satisfied with those same old conversations. The fact that you are irritated is, in a strange way, a compliment to your own soul. It means you have refused to stop evolving. However, the trap is in how we handle this irritation. If we immediately interpret the discomfort as a sign that we need to destroy our current life, we often act out of reactivity rather than intelligence. We quit our jobs before we have a plan. We blow up relationships before we have communicated our needs. We seek to escape the discomfort rather than understanding the message it carries. Think of discomfort as a messenger. If you have a pebble in your shoe while you are walking, you feel discomfort. The message is simple: there is an obstruction that needs to be removed. If you stop, take off your shoe, and remove the pebble, the discomfort vanishes, and you can continue your journey. But if you ignore the pain, you will eventually develop a limp. You will start walking in a way that compensates for the pain, which will eventually lead to hip issues, back pain, and a distorted way of moving through the world. In your life, this initial feeling of being unable to tolerate the status quo is the pebble in your shoe. You have been walking with it for a long time, and you have become accustomed to the pain. You have learned how to compensate. You have learned how to lean to one side so that you do not have to feel the sharpness of your own dissatisfaction. But now, the awareness of that pebble has become impossible to ignore. You can no longer pretend it is not there. This is a moment of profound psychological potential. It is a moment where you are given the opportunity to stop, take off your shoe, and assess the situation with honesty. Why do we find this so frightening? Because to acknowledge the discomfort is to acknowledge that we can no longer go back to who we were. Once you realize that you are unhappy in your current environment, you lose the ability to hide in that unhappiness. You are now aware, and awareness is a one-way door. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unfeel what you have felt. This is why many people fight this stage so hard. They want to return to the bliss of ignorance. They want the comfort of being the person who didn't know better. They want to go back to being the person who could tolerate the disrespect, the boredom, or the lack of growth. But that person no longer exists. The very fact that you are reading these words, the very fact that you are feeling this friction, is proof that you have already started the process of becoming someone new. In this chapter, we must establish a new way of relating to your own emotional state. Stop viewing your irritation as an enemy. Stop viewing your restlessness as a sign that something is wrong with you. Instead, view these emotions as data. When you feel a surge of annoyance at a repetitive conversation, ask yourself, what standard of mine is being violated here? When you feel suffocated by your workspace, ask yourself, what quality of my work or my environment is no longer reflecting my potential? This is the beginning of the transition. It is not about immediate destruction. It is about immediate investigation. When you start to view your life through this lens of investigation, the discomfort begins to lose its sting. It stops being a vague, haunting sensation of failure and becomes a concrete, useful signal of growth. You are gathering information about your needs, your values, and the boundaries you are ready to set. This process requires a significant amount of courage. It takes courage to admit that you are not satisfied with things that are objectively fine. It takes courage to look at a life that others might envy and admit that it does not fit you. But remember, the goal of life is not to build something that looks impressive to others. The goal of life is to inhabit an existence that allows you to feel aligned, authentic, and whole. As we move forward into the next chapter, we will begin to look at the history of how you arrived at this point. We will examine why you were able to tolerate these conditions for so long, and how your mind and body learned to make peace with things that were fundamentally unhealthy. But for now, sit with the truth of this moment. You are growing, and growing is painful because it is pushing against the limits of who you have been. You are not losing your mind. You are losing the limitations that have been keeping you small. Chapter Summary. Transformation rarely begins with positive certainty. It often begins with a sense of irritation or restlessness that we do not immediately understand. The discomfort you feel is often evidence of expanded awareness, meaning you have outgrown the conditions you once accepted. Your internal world has accelerated, but your external environment has remained the same, creating a natural and necessary friction. Many people try to numb this discomfort with habits or distractions, but doing so only delays the inevitable process of growth. Discomfort should be treated as a messenger rather than a sign of failure. It provides data about your unmet needs and evolving standards. Acknowledging this friction is a turning point because it ends the possibility of returning to a state of ignorant contentment. You must learn to stop viewing your restlessness as an enemy and start viewing it as the alarm bell of your own potential. The goal is to move from reactive escape to intentional investigation, using your discomfort to define the boundaries and standards you truly need. Courage is required to admit that your current life no longer fits, even when it looks successful from the outside. You are not failing, you are simply in the process of shedding an old identity that is no longer compatible with. Chapter 2, why you once accepted what you can no longer tolerate. To understand why you have suddenly reached a breaking point, we must look backward. It is easy to look at your current life and judge your past self for accepting circumstances that now seem ridiculous or beneath you. You might wonder how you stayed in a friendship that drained your spirit for years, or why you worked for an employer who clearly did not value your contribution. You might look at your past compromises with a sense of embarrassment, wondering why you did not see the truth sooner. However, if you are to move forward with wisdom, you must first develop compassion for the version of you who had to survive the life you were living. We do not choose our compromises by accident. We chose them because, at the time, they were the only tools we had to maintain our stability. Human beings are, at our core, survivalists. When we are young, or when we are navigating seasons of uncertainty, our nervous systems prioritize safety over fulfillment. If you grew up in an environment where your needs were often overlooked, you learned early on that the most effective way to be accepted was to minimize yourself. You learned that if you were quiet, compliant, or useful to others, you would be kept safe within the group. This creates a blueprint for how we navigate our adult lives. We often carry these childhood survival strategies into our relationships and our workplaces. We assume that to have a seat at the table, we must forfeit our voice. We assume that to keep a relationship, we must ignore our own boundaries. This is not a failure of character, it is a successful, albeit outdated, strategy for safety. You accepted what you could not tolerate because, in the past, tolerating it was the price of admission to the life you had access to. Consider the concept of normalization. We are incredibly adaptable creatures. When we are exposed to a difficult, chaotic, or unfulfilling environment for a long enough period, our brains begin to treat that reality as the baseline. It is like the ambient noise of a city. If you move into an apartment next to a busy train station, the first few nights are loud and jarring. You might be unable to sleep. But within a month, your brain filters out the sound of the trains. You stop hearing them entirely. You might even find that you struggle to sleep in a house that is too quiet. Our relationships and career choices work the same way. If you are consistently subjected to criticism or subtle disrespect, your brain eventually stops registering it as an anomaly and starts registering it as the weather. It becomes the environment. You become accustomed to the cold, so you stop shivering. You begin to define your life by the lack of extreme disaster rather than the presence of genuine joy. You confuse the absence of crisis with the presence of peace. This is why you stayed. You were not necessarily happy, but you were safe, and your nervous system had learned how to predict and manage the familiar patterns of your environment. The tragedy of this adaptation is that it keeps us trapped in a cycle of diminishing returns. Because we have learned to tolerate the unacceptable, we lose our sensitivity to the boundaries that actually matter. We become so adept at enduring that we lose the ability to ask for better. We begin to believe that our suffering is just a part of the human condition. We might even romanticize our endurance, telling ourselves that being able to take a lot of pressure is a sign of our strength. We pride ourselves on being the person who can handle anything. But there is a difference between resilience and self-betrayal. Resilience is the ability to recover from hardship. Self-betrayal is the decision to stay in hardship when you have the capacity to leave. Furthermore, we must examine the role of fear in our tolerance. The unknown is the most terrifying landscape for the human mind. Staying in a relationship that is failing, or working a job that is suffocating, feels significantly safer than the prospect of being alone or being unemployed. We know the pain of our current situation. We have mapped it out. We know how to navigate it, how to survive it, and how to work around it. The prospect of change, however, involves variables we cannot control. We fear the judgment of others. We fear the possibility that we might fail if we try to strike out on our own. We fear that maybe we were wrong, and that this is the best we will ever get. So, we hold on. We rationalize. We tell ourselves that things will change if we just work a little harder, or if we just change our own attitude. We hope that if we play our role perfectly, the other people in our lives will eventually notice and start treating us better. We wait for the universe to grant us the permission to stand up, never realizing that the permission we are waiting for must come from ourselves. It is also important to recognize that your past self was operating with the information they had at the time. You did not have the wisdom you have now. You did not have the expanded awareness that has only recently arrived. Do not judge your past self with the tools of your future. That version of you did the best they could with the resources available, the level of maturity reached, and the fears held. The fact that you are now able to see those compromises for what they were is not a reason to feel ashamed. It is a reason to celebrate, because it means you have finally outgrown the logic that kept you small. As you begin to shed these old layers, you will notice that the things you once tolerated no longer make sense. You will find yourself wondering how you ever allowed a conversation to proceed in a way that left you feeling diminished. You will question why you stayed in a room where your presence was not honored. This is the necessary shedding of an old skin. It is not about anger at the past, but about moving toward the clarity of the present. You were not weak for tolerating these things. You were merely waiting for the moment when your self-worth would finally become greater than your fear. That moment has arrived. Your tolerance for your own compromise has hit its limit, and that is not a disaster. It is a victory. It is the beginning of the end of the life you were meant to outgrow. Chapter Summary. It is common to judge your former self for past compromises, but it is more productive to acknowledge that you were simply using the survival tools you had at the time. We often choose to tolerate unacceptable situations because our nervous system prioritizes predictable safety over uncertain fulfillment. Our brains possess a powerful ability to normalize difficult environments, which can lead us to accept harmful patterns as if they were the standard climate of our lives. We often confuse the absence of extreme crises with the presence of peace, causing us to stay in situations that are stagnant or unfulfilling. True resilience is the ability to recover from hardship. Self-betrayal is the decision to stay in hardship when we have the capacity to change. The fear of the unknown is a primary driver of our tolerance, as we prefer the known pain of our current situation over the uncertainty of change. We often rationalize our status quo in hopes that others will change, rather than accepting that we must be the ones to shift our own boundaries. Your past self operated on the information and maturity level available to them, and they deserve compassion for navigating those challenges. Recognizing that you once accepted things you can no longer tolerate is not a cause for shame, but a clear sign that you have successfully outgrown your old survival mechanisms. Your shift in perspective. Chapter 3, When your awareness outgrows your environment. Growth is not always a grand migration to a new city or a dramatic resignation from a career. Often, it is a quiet, internal expansion that makes your current surroundings feel physically and psychologically cramped. You might find yourself sitting in the same office, living in the same home, or walking the same streets, yet everything feels suddenly and inexplicably small. This is the sensation of having outgrown your container. Your internal world has grown while your external world has remained static, and this gap creates a tension that is impossible to ignore. When we talk about environments, we are not just referring to the physical space of a room or a building. We are talking about the entire ecosystem of your life, the routines you follow, the conversations you participate in, the expectations placed upon you, and the roles you have agreed to play. An environment is a set of recurring conditions. It is a psychological contract that tells you who you are allowed to be. If you have been the peacemaker in your family expects you to keep the peace. If you have been a reliable employee at your firm, your boss expects you to remain reliable. When your awareness expands, you begin to see that these roles are not who you are, but merely costumes you have been wearing to make those environments function. The discomfort you feel when your awareness outgrows your environment is similar to what happens when you try to force a plant to thrive in a pot that has become too small. Initially, the plant is fine. It grows, it settles, and it develops a rhythm. But eventually, the roots begin to coil around the bottom of the pot. They have nowhere left to go. The plant stops growing outward and starts to choke on its own density. If you do not transplant it, the plant will begin to wither, not because it is unhealthy, but because its environment can no longer support its nature. You are currently in this transitional phase. You have developed roots that require more space, more light, and more depth than your current life provides. This is why you feel suffocated in spaces that used to bring you comfort. You enter a room and feel as if the oxygen has been removed. You engage in a regular conversation and feel as if you are reading from a script that no longer contains your actual thoughts. You look at your routine and feel as if you are performing a pantomime of your own life. This feeling of being suffocated is a profound form of feedback. It is telling you that the containers you have built are now too narrow for the person you are becoming. This applies to your physical environment, like clutter in your home or the monotony of your workspace. It also applies to your social environment. You may find that certain friendships, which were once the bedrock of your support system, now feel heavy. It is not that these friends have become bad people, or that you have become superior. It is simply that the energetic frequency of your connection has shifted. You are no longer vibrating at the same level as the container you have shared for years. When this realization hits, the temptation is to blame the environment. We look at our partners, our friends, or our colleagues and think, why are they not growing with me? Why do they keep expecting me to be the person I was 5 years ago? This is a natural reaction, but it is also a trap. Your environment is not obligated to change just because you have. Your friends, family, and colleagues have their own timelines and their own journeys. They are not stagnant because they are failing, they are simply in a different phase of their own evolution. When you project your expectations onto them, you create unnecessary conflict and resentment. Instead of trying to force your environment to change, focus on the reality of the mismatch. The friction you feel is a signal that you need a new container. This does not always mean you must discard your current relationships or quit your job. It means you must change the way you inhabit these spaces. You can change the terms of the contract. You can stop playing the role that the environment expects of you. You can set new boundaries that protect your growing awareness. You can curate your life with more intention. However, there will be times when the mismatch is too great to reconcile. There are environments that are fundamentally built on the premise that you remain small, silent, or compliant. In those cases, the only way to thrive is to leave. This is the hardest part of the process, because it requires you to walk away from spaces where you once felt secure. It requires you to accept the temporary loneliness that comes with stepping out of a container that has become too small for your spirit. Do not rush this. Moving to a new container before you are ready can be just as damaging as staying in one that is too small. If you move from one situation to another without doing the internal work of understanding your needs, you will eventually find yourself in the exact same dynamic under a different name. You will find that you have simply traded one cramped pot for another. This is why the discomfort of the threshold is so vital. It is the time where you learn what you need, what you value, and what you are no longer willing to trade away. Use this time of feeling suffocated to clarify what kind of container you actually need. What does your new environment look like? What kind of conversations honor your intelligence? What kind of professional challenges excite your soul? What relationships allow your full self to be present? When you have clear answers to these questions, you will stop seeing your current discomfort as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as a compass pointing toward your future. You are in a period of preparation. The discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, it is a sign that you are outgrowing the structure of your life. Trust the process. The feeling of being cramped is merely the sensation of your own internal growth pushing against the walls of your reality. You are not meant to stay in the pot forever. You are meant to be transplanted, and the process of that transition is currently underway. Take a deep breath. You are becoming someone who cannot be contained by the past, and that is a beautiful and necessary thing. Chapter Summary. Growth often manifests as a feeling of being cramped or suffocated in environments that were previously acceptable. An environment is a set of conditions and expectations. When you outgrow these, the container can no longer support your nature. Feeling suffocated is a form of feedback, signaling that the roles you have played and the routines you have followed no longer match your expanded awareness. You may outgrow not just physical spaces, but also the energetic frequency of your social and professional connections. It is unfair to expect your environment or the people in it to evolve at the same pace as you. Focus on your own growth rather than their stagnation. The goal is to either renegotiate the terms of your current environment through new boundaries or, if necessary, step into a new container entirely. Rushing to change your external environment without doing the internal work of identifying your needs can result in repeating the same patterns. Use your discomfort as a tool to define the specific qualities you require in your future environment and relationships. This feeling of being cramped is not a sign of failure, but a sign of your own internal expansion pushing against the boundaries of your previous life. Trust that this transition is a necessary part of your development and that you are preparing. Chapter 4: The Old Identity Will Fight to Survive. When you begin the process of changing your life, you are not just battling external circumstances or difficult relationships. You are engaging in a fierce, internal war against your own identity. You are fighting against a version of yourself that has been carefully constructed over decades, a version that has learned exactly how to survive, how to please, and how to remain predictable. Your old identity is not a passive thing. It is a protective mechanism, and like any defensive system, it will fight to survive the moment it feels threatened by your evolution. We often think of identity as a solid, permanent object, but it is actually a dynamic and persistent set of habits. It is the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you are capable of, and what you deserve. This story has been reinforced by every experience, every failure, every success, and every interaction you have ever had. Your brain loves this story because it provides a reliable, efficient way to process the world. It does not have to constantly decide how to act or how to feel, it just refers back to the old identity and performs the same reliable behaviors. When you start to push against the boundaries of that identity, when you decide that you are no longer willing to tolerate neglect, or that you are finally ready to pursue your own ambition, you are essentially telling your brain that the old playbook is obsolete. Your nervous system, which has been trained to keep you safe through conformity and familiar patterns, perceives this shift as a threat. It views your growth not as a victory, but as an existential risk. If you are not the person who stays quiet, then who are you? If you are not the person who accepts the bare minimum, how will you be perceived by the world? This is why you may experience a profound sense of resistance during the early stages of your transformation. You will find yourself intellectually desiring change while simultaneously sabotaging your own progress. You will make a commitment to yourself in the morning, only to fall back into your old patterns of pleasing people by the afternoon. You will decide to set a boundary, and then immediately feel a surge of intense guilt or anxiety that forces you to retract it. This is not because you lack discipline or willpower. It is because your old identity is actively defending its territory. It is helpful to view this resistance as a biological reflex. Your brain is wired to prefer the known, even when the known is painful, because the known is predictable. Predictability is the nervous system's version of safety. When you venture into the unknown, you are asking your brain to navigate without a map. This triggers a stress response that makes you want to return to the familiar. You might find yourself missing things that you logically know were bad for you. You might experience a sudden nostalgia for a toxic environment or a job that made you miserable. This is your old identity trying to pull you back into the comfort of the status quo. To overcome this, you must treat your old identity with the firm kindness you would show a child who is afraid of the dark. You cannot fight it with anger or self-hatred, because that only reinforces the stress response. Instead, you must acknowledge its purpose. Thank your old identity for the ways it kept you safe in the past. Recognize that it was a necessary survival tool for a different time. Then, gently but firmly, inform them that the current environment has changed. You are no longer in the situation that required those specific defenses. You are now in a new landscape that requires a new way of being. One of the most profound aspects of this struggle is the necessity of grieving. We rarely talk about the grief involved in personal transformation, but it is perhaps the most significant hurdle. When you shift your identity, you are effectively letting an old version of yourself die. That version of you had dreams, even if they were limited. It had relationships, even if they were unhealthy. It had a sense of certainty about the future, even if that future was smaller than what you actually want. Grieving the loss of that person is essential. If you do not allow yourself to feel the sadness of shedding your old skin, you will find yourself trying to carry that dead weight into your new life, which will eventually slow your progress and cause you to stumble. You must be willing to become a stranger to yourself. Many people are terrified of this prospect. They want to change, but they want to keep the feeling of being the same person. They want the results of a new identity without the vulnerability of losing the old one. But growth is not an addition, it is a transformation. You cannot become the person you are meant to be while clutching the hand of the person you have been. You must be willing to step into the void where you do not yet know the rules, the habits, or the responses that define your new life. Pay attention to the moments when you feel the most resistance. These are usually the moments when you are on the verge of a breakthrough. When you feel that intense urge to go back, to apologize, to retract a boundary, or to shrink into the background, stop and ask yourself, what part of me is feeling threatened right now? Is it the part of me that is growing, or the part of me that is afraid of losing the safety of the past? When you can name the resistance, it loses its power over you. You start to see it for what it is, a relic of a previous survival strategy, not a prophecy of your future failure. This process is not linear. You will have days when you feel entirely transformed and days when you feel like you have regressed entirely. Do not interpret the regression as a sign that you have failed. It is simply the old identity making one last stand to reclaim your attention. With every act of consistent, new behavior, you are training your brain to recognize the new identity as the default. You are building new pathways, new responses, and a new story. Eventually, the resistance will fade, not because the old identity disappears completely, but because your new identity has become the comfortable, reliable, and authentic source of your safety. You are not losing your life, you are finally beginning to claim it. Chapter Summary. Your identity is a protective mechanism that has learned to survive and remain predictable. It will naturally resist change because it views growth as an existential threat. The resistance you feel is a biological reflex rather than a lack of willpower. Your brain prefers the known and predictable over the unknown, even when the known is painful. You will often experience a cycle of desiring change while simultaneously sabotaging your own progress because your nervous system is fighting to return to familiar territory. Grieving is an essential part of the transformation process. You must allow yourself to mourn the loss of your old self, its dreams, and its familiar, albeit limited, life. Treating your old identity with firm kindness is more effective than fighting it with anger. Acknowledge the ways it kept you safe before letting it go. You must be willing to become a stranger to yourself, stepping into the void of the unknown without trying to cling to the habits and reactions of your past. Moments of intense resistance are often markers of an impending breakthrough. When you feel the urge to retract, ask which part of you is being threatened. Naming your resistance helps it lose its power, allowing you to see it as an outdated survival strategy rather than a sign of failure. Transformation is not linear. You will have days of regression, which are just the old identity attempting to reclaim control. Through consistent, new behaviors, you are. Chapter 5, The people who knew the old you may resist the new you. There is a strange and often painful phenomenon that occurs when you begin the process of internal transformation. You start to feel more centered, you begin setting clearer boundaries, and you start making choices that actually align with your values. You expect the people in your life to be happy for you. You expect that as you become a more authentic version of yourself, the people who love you will celebrate your growth. But often, the reaction you receive is not celebration. It is confusion, suspicion, or even active resistance. When you begin to change, you alter the equilibrium of every relationship you participate in. Your friends, family, and colleagues have become accustomed to a specific version of you. They know exactly how you will react when they cross a boundary. They know how much of your time they can demand. They know the role you play in the dynamic of your social group or your family. When you start to step out of that role, you create a vacuum. The people who relied on your old identity to define their own lives suddenly find themselves off balance. They are forced to confront the fact that the person they thought they knew is no longer playing by the old rules. This resistance is rarely an act of malice. In many cases, it is a reflection of their own internal discomfort. When you stand up for yourself, you serve as a mirror that shows them where they are still failing to stand up for themselves. When you stop tolerating disrespect, you inadvertently highlight the fact that they are still willing to tolerate it. This can trigger feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, or fear in the people closest to you. They may try to pull you back into your old patterns, not because they want to hurt you, but because your growth forces them to look at their own stagnation. You might hear comments that sound like gentle teasing but are actually attempts at manipulation. They might say things like, "You have changed so much lately," or, "I miss the old you who was so easygoing," or, "You are starting to take yourself too seriously." These comments are designed to make you feel guilty for your evolution. They are intended to make you feel like you are losing your connection to them, and in a way, you are. You are losing the connection to a specific, limited version of yourself that they found convenient. It is vital to understand that not every relationship is designed to survive the totality of your growth. Some relationships are built on shared trauma, shared patterns of low self-worth, or a mutual commitment to staying small. When you remove yourself from that arrangement, the relationship can no longer function in its original form. This is not necessarily a sign of failure. It is a sign of honesty. If a relationship can only exist when you are silent, small, or unhappy, then the relationship was never really between two whole people. It was between two roles. As you navigate this, you will have to make difficult choices. You will have to decide who is willing to meet you at your new level and who is committed to the version of you that no longer exists. You cannot force others to grow with you. If you try to pull them along, you will exhaust yourself and eventually resent them. Instead, give them the space to adapt to the new you. Some will adjust. They will see the light in your new way of living, and they will be inspired to examine their own lives. These are the relationships that will deepen and evolve. Others will drift away. They will find your presence challenging or uncomfortable, and they will slowly pull back. This is the hardest part of the process, especially when those people are family or lifelong friends. You will feel a sense of loss, and you must honor that grief. It is okay to mourn the end of a dynamic, even if you are the one who initiated the shift. Do not try to hold on to people by shrinking yourself back down to a size that makes them feel comfortable. That is a form of self-betrayal that will eventually lead to resentment and emotional decay. It is also important to recognize that your new boundaries are not a weapon. You do not need to use your transformation as a way to punish those who did not support you in the past. You can set firm, clear boundaries with grace and kindness. You can say no to a request without launching into a long justification. You can choose to spend less time in environments that drain you without making a public declaration of your growth. Your transformation should be a quiet, internal process that results in external clarity. You are not trying to change others, you are simply changing your own participation in their world. When you encounter resistance, look at it as a test of your own commitment. If you retract your boundary because someone is unhappy with it, you are proving that your need for their approval is still greater than your respect for your own needs. If you hold your boundary with kindness and consistency, you are teaching them how to interact with the new you. Over time, the people who truly care about you will learn to respect the new standards you have set. They will begin to see that you are happier, more grounded, and more present, and that truth will override their initial discomfort. There is a profound freedom in realizing that you are not responsible for the way others perceive your evolution. You are responsible for your integrity. You are responsible for the peace you cultivate within yourself. You are responsible for the life you are building. If that life makes others uncomfortable, that is not your burden to bear. As you move forward, keep your focus on your own internal compass. The people who are meant to be in your life will eventually align with the frequency of your growth. Those who cannot will inevitably find their own way elsewhere. This is not a process of ending relationships, it is a process of refining them. You are thinning the circle to those who are capable of witnessing and celebrating the true you. It is better to have 3 people who support your full, authentic expression than 50 people who only support the version of you that remains easy for them to manage. Trust that the relationships that are lost were placeholders, and the relationships that remain are the ones you have the space to nurture in your new, expansive life. Chapter Summary. Your personal transformation will inevitably alter the balance of your relationships, which can cause confusion or resistance in those who benefited from your old identity. People close to you may resist your growth because it forces them to confront their own stagnation or their willingness to tolerate less than they deserve. Attempts to manipulate you back into your old patterns are often based on fear and a desire to maintain the familiar, rather than an intentional desire to harm you. Not every relationship is designed to survive your growth, some are built on shared limitations rather than mutual flourishing. Mourning the loss of a dynamic is a necessary and healthy part of the transition, but you must not shrink yourself back down to maintain connection. Boundaries are not weapons to be used against others, but tools for your own integrity. You can maintain them with grace, kindness, and consistency. You are not responsible for how others feel about your evolution. Your primary responsibility is to your own values and your own peace. Resistance from others is a test of your commitment to your own needs. Holding your boundaries teaches others how to interact with the new you. This is a process of refining your relationships, letting go of the ones that required you to be small and making space for those that honor your expansion. Do not feel guilty for outgrowing the roles you once played. The right people will appreciate your authenticity, and the wrong one. Chapter 6: When Peace Becomes More Important Than Belonging. We are born into a world that prioritizes belonging above almost everything else. From our earliest moments, we learn that our survival depends on being part of a group, whether that is a family, a classroom, or a social circle. We learn to read the room, to adjust our volume, to edit our opinions, and to suppress our genuine desires in order to remain safe within the pack. We trade pieces of ourselves for the feeling of being included. This is a survival strategy that serves us well in childhood, but it often becomes the very thing that prevents us from becoming who we are in adulthood. There comes a point in your transformation when you reach a dangerous, beautiful realization: belonging is not the same thing as being understood, and fitting in is not the same thing as being at peace. You begin to notice that the price of belonging is often the suppression of your own truth. You see that to keep the peace in your various circles, you have to constantly apologize for your presence, your success, or your standards. You realize that you have been working overtime to ensure that no one else feels threatened by your existence. This is the moment where peace begins to outweigh the need for belonging. Peace is not just the absence of conflict, it is the presence of alignment. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are not betraying yourself in any room you enter. When you prioritize peace, you stop seeking approval from people who do not share your values. You stop trying to convince people to see your worth. You stop explaining your choices to people who have no interest in understanding them. The transition to this mindset is often lonely. When you decide that you are no longer willing to perform the role of the peacemaker, or the role of the perpetual supporter, or the role of the agreeable participant, you will inevitably lose access to certain groups. People will miss the version of you that served them. They will miss your compliance. They might even label you as difficult or distant. This is the tax you pay for authenticity. It is a price that is heavy to bear, but it is necessary if you are to own your own life. You must be prepared for the silence. When you stop chasing the validation of the crowd, the initial feeling is not immediate relief. It is a hollow, empty sensation. Your brain, which has spent years feeding on the dopamine of external approval, will experience a form of withdrawal. You will feel an urge to reach out, to smooth things over, to revert to the old you just to feel the warmth of the group once again. This is the moment of your deepest test. If you can sit through that silence without running back to the old patterns, you will find that a new kind of inner strength begins to take root. Choosing peace over belonging requires you to develop a different definition of intimacy. We often think that intimacy is about being known by everyone. But true intimacy is about being known by the right people. It is about the quality of the connection, not the quantity of the connections. You will find that as you stop trying to belong to everyone, you start to find the few people who actually see you. These connections are different, they do not require you to edit your soul. They are built on mutual respect, curiosity, and a shared commitment to growth. Consider the energy you spend on people who do not truly support your journey. How much time do you spend managing their reactions? How much mental space do you occupy worrying about whether you have offended them? This is energy that should be going into your own creation. When you reclaim that energy, you suddenly have the capacity to build, to rest, to learn, and to exist in a way that feels fundamentally more stable. Peace is the byproduct of taking your energy back from the things that do not return it. There is a significant difference between choosing to be alone and being lonely. When you are lonely, you are pining for a connection that is not there. When you are alone in the pursuit of peace, you are in a state of solitude that is both rich and restorative. You are becoming your own company. You are learning to enjoy the sound of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your own choices, and the safety of your own boundaries. You are no longer looking for a tribe that demands your surrender. You are looking for a community that encourages your sovereignty. Do not fear the label of being difficult. Often, when people say you are difficult, they actually mean you are difficult to manipulate. When you say you are tired of being the one who makes all the compromises, that is not a sign of being difficult, it is a sign of having standards. When you choose to leave a conversation that is gossip-based or negative, that is not a sign of being distant, it is a sign of having values. Own these labels. Wear them as evidence that you are no longer playing the game of belonging at the expense of your own peace. This does not mean you must become a hermit or cut everyone off. You can participate in the world without being governed by it. You can be kind, generous, and connected, while still maintaining the integrity of your own boundaries. You can love people without needing their agreement. This is the highest form of maturity. It is the ability to walk through the world with an open heart while remaining completely grounded in your own truth. As you step into this new way of being, remind yourself that the people who truly love you will be relieved to see you at peace. They will not want you to stay small for their comfort. They will want you to thrive. If they push back, it is because they have not yet found their own peace. Hold space for them, but do not sacrifice your own progress to keep them company in their discomfort. You are setting an example. By choosing peace over belonging, you are showing others that it is possible to live without the chains of approval. You are lighting a path, and eventually, the people who are ready to see it will join you there. Chapter Summary. We are conditioned from birth to prioritize belonging, often at the expense of our own authenticity and truth. There is a fundamental difference between fitting in and being understood. Fitting in is a performance, while being understood is an alignment. Peace is the presence of alignment, and it can only be achieved when you stop betraying yourself to appease others. The shift toward prioritizing peace is often accompanied by a sense of loneliness and withdrawal as you stop seeking external validation. You must learn to withstand the silence of the crowd without running back to the comfort of old, restrictive patterns. True intimacy is found in the quality of your connections, not the quantity. Focus on the few who see and respect your authentic self. Reclaiming the energy spent on managing other people's reactions is essential for your personal creation and stability. Being labeled as difficult is often a sign that you are becoming difficult to manipulate, which is a major milestone in your growth. Solitude is a restorative and powerful state that allows you to become your own company and solidify your own standards. You do not need to become a hermit to prioritize peace, you simply need to cultivate. Chapter 7. Your nervous system may still crave what your soul has outgrown. There is a profound and often confusing gap between what you know to be true and what your body feels to be safe. You have reached a level of awareness where you recognize that your old life is no longer healthy, yet you find your nervous system pulling you back toward the very patterns you are trying to escape. This is not a contradiction of your intelligence or a lack of character. It is a biological reality. Your nervous system is an ancient, highly efficient machine designed to seek out what is familiar, even if that familiar thing is the cause of your current suffering. We often mistakenly believe that because we have had an intellectual breakthrough, our bodies will automatically follow suit. We think that once we decide to leave a toxic cycle, we should immediately feel at ease in our new, healthier reality. However, the body does not work on the timeline of the mind. Your nervous system has spent years, perhaps decades, mapping out the terrain of your old life. It knows the stress responses that come with certain conversations. It knows the specific chemical cocktail that is released when you are in a situation of conflict or neglect. It has built a comfort zone out of your past, and it perceives the arrival of peace as a threat to its established rhythm. Think of your nervous system as a creature of habit. If you have been living in a state of high alert for most of your life, your body has become addicted to the hormones of stress, such as cortisol and adrenaline. In a state of rest or authentic happiness, your body may actually feel bored or even anxious, because it does not know how to process a reality that does not require a defensive posture. This is why you might feel the urge to create drama when things are quiet. This is why you might find yourself reaching for a phone to check on a situation you know is harmful, or why you might start a conversation that is destined to lead to a fight. Your body is trying to return you to the familiar, chaotic state that it considers normal. This is the tension between your conscious growth and your conditioned emotional patterns. Your soul wants to move toward expansion, love, and stability, but your biology is fighting to keep you in the place where it knows the rules of engagement. When you experience this pull, it is easy to interpret it as a sign that you were wrong about your growth. You might think, if I was truly meant to leave this behind, why do I still miss it? Why do I still feel a physical craving to return to it? You must learn to separate the craving from the value. Just because you miss something does not mean it belongs in your future. Hunger is a signal, but it is not a guide to what is actually nutritious for your body. To manage this, you must treat your nervous system with the patience of a parent training a child. When you feel that visceral pull toward an old habit or a past relationship, label it. Say to yourself, this is not a sign that I need to go back. This is just my nervous system craving the familiarity of a stress response. By naming the feeling, you create a distance between your identity and your biological impulse. You stop being the victim of your own reactions and start being the observer of your own internal landscape. You must also engage in the work of soothing your body during this transition. If your system is wired for chaos, you cannot simply talk yourself into calm. You must give your body new experiences of safety. This can look like consistent, simple rituals that anchor your nervous system in the present moment. It might be the deliberate practice of deep, slow breathing when you feel the urge to escalate a conflict. It might be the regular routine of walking in nature, or the act of creating a quiet space in your home that has no ties to your past. These are not trivial habits. They are functional tools for rewiring your biology to recognize that safety is not found in conflict, but in quietude. Be prepared for the fact that healing often feels uncomfortable at first. When you start to live a life that is truly aligned with your needs, your nervous system will initially react as if it is in danger. You might experience unexplained restlessness, difficulty sleeping, or a sense of looming dread. This is not a sign of failure. It is the sensation of your body adjusting to a new baseline. You are detoxing from the chaos. Just as a body experiences physical withdrawal when changing its diet, your nervous system experiences emotional withdrawal when it is forced to move away from its addictive patterns. Patience is your greatest asset here. Do not try to force your nervous system to change overnight. If you find yourself slipping back into an old pattern, do not beat yourself up. Acknowledge the slip, observe what triggered the urge, and gently guide yourself back to your current reality. The more you repeat these acts of conscious choice, the more you weaken the hold of your old conditioning. Eventually, your body will catch up to your mind. It will begin to find safety in the new, healthy, and expansive life you are building. It will learn to associate peace with security, and it will eventually stop triggering that alarm bell when you are actually doing well. Ultimately, this process is about teaching your body how to trust your future. Your past was a teacher, but it is no longer the master of your destiny. You are moving from a life of survival into a life of intentional design. This requires you to be the guardian of your own energy and the architect of your own calm. Stay committed to the process, even when your body protests. The discomfort of this transition is temporary, but the freedom of a regulated, aligned life is permanent. You are doing the hard work of unlearning the habits of your past, and in doing so, you are creating the space for your true life to finally take root. Chapter Summary. There is a physiological gap between intellectual growth and biological regulation. Your nervous system clings to familiar patterns, even when they are destructive. Your body is a machine conditioned for the past, and it perceives your new, healthier reality as a threat because it lacks the familiar stressors of the old life. You may find yourself craving the chaos of your past because your system has become addicted to the hormones of stress like cortisol and adrenaline. Distinguish between a genuine need and a biological craving. Missing an old pattern does not mean it is good for you or meant to be in your future. Labeling your urges as biological habits rather than meaningful signs helps create the distance needed to maintain your new boundaries. Soothing your nervous system requires active, consistent practices that anchor your body in the present moment and prove that peace is a safe state. Healing often feels uncomfortable because you are experiencing a form of withdrawal from the chaos that defined your old baseline. Be patient with your regression. Slip-ups are part of the process of rewiring your biology and do not signal that your growth has failed. Consistent repetition of new, healthy choices eventually trains your body to recognize peace, rather than stress, as the standard for safety. By becoming the guardian of your own calm, you are successfully moving from a life of survival into a life. Chapter 8, The Lonely Space Between Who You Were and Who You Are Becoming. There is a precise moment in the process of transformation that is rarely discussed in books about success or personal growth. It is the moment when you have successfully let go of the old life, but you have not yet arrived at the new one. You are standing in the middle of a vast, silent, and often terrifying threshold. You have walked out of the door of your previous identity, and you have closed it behind you, but you are not yet standing inside the home you are meant to build. This is the space of the unknown, and it is here that many people lose their nerve and attempt to run back to the familiar. We tend to romanticize the idea of change, imagining it as a clean break or a swift transition. We think of it like moving into a new apartment, where we pack our bags in one place and arrive at the other with everything in order. But real human transformation is more like being caught in the middle of a forest at night. The path behind you is overgrown and blocked, and the path ahead is obscured by mist. There is no map, there is no guide, and there is no guarantee that you will arrive exactly when you expect. This period of transition is fundamentally lonely. It is lonely because you are no longer speaking the language of your old circle, yet you have not yet found the community that will understand your new way of existing. You feel like a person who has changed their entire internal world, yet you still have to navigate the external world that treats you as if you are the same person you were a year ago. You go to your familiar spaces, you sit with your familiar friends, and you feel a profound sense of isolation because you realize that you are the only one who knows the truth of your own interior shift. Do not mistake this loneliness for a failure. In fact, it is an essential part of the process. This space is a laboratory for your soul. It is only in the absence of the roles, the expectations, and the external validation of your old life that you can truly hear the voice of your own intuition. When you are surrounded by the constant noise of other people's opinions, you cannot hear yourself. When you are busy playing the role that society has assigned to you, you cannot investigate the desires that are actually yours. This loneliness is the price of admission to your own authentic self. The temptation in this space is to fill it. You want to pick up your phone, you want to call an old friend, you want to return to a job you dislike, or you want to jump into a new relationship, all to escape the sensation of being alone with yourself. You feel as though if you just have someone else there, the emptiness will go away. But the emptiness is not an enemy to be conquered. It is a canvas to be painted. If you rush to fill this space, you will fill it with the same old patterns, and you will find yourself in the same old cycles. Instead of running from loneliness, you must learn to inhabit it. This is where you develop the muscle of self-reliance. You have to learn how to keep your own company, how to validate your own experiences, and how to hold your own space when the world feels indifferent to your transition. This is the time to develop the internal resources that will sustain you for the rest of your life. When you know how to be with yourself in the silence, you become a person who can never truly be threatened by external conditions. You will likely experience periods of grief here. You will miss the simplicity of not knowing. You will miss the comfort of being the person who could easily blend in. You will miss the fantasy of the future you once imagined, even if that fantasy was not actually what you wanted. Allow yourself to cry, to journal, to sit in the quiet, and to acknowledge the weight of what you are letting go. Grief is the transition point between the past and the future. By fully feeling the weight of the past, you make space for the lightness of the future to enter. There is also a risk of confusion in this space. Because you feel so different, you might start to think that you have done something wrong. You might feel that your life is losing its structure, and therefore its meaning. You might see others moving forward in their own lives, getting married, hitting promotions, following the traditional path, and feel a twinge of panic that you are falling behind. But you are not falling behind. You are detaching from a timeline that was never yours to begin with. You are learning to move according to the rhythm of your own soul, which is a much slower, deeper, and more deliberate process. Trust that the space between is where the transformation actually happens. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly by rushing through the chrysalis. It dissolves into a liquid state, losing its form entirely, before it can reassemble into something new. This is the process you are going through. You are currently in the chrysalis. You are dissolving your old identity so that the new one can emerge. It is not pretty, and it certainly does not feel like you are achieving anything, but it is the most critical stage of the entire journey. If you find yourself in this space today, take a deep breath and settle in. Stop looking for the door. Stop trying to figure out the exact coordinates of your arrival. You are exactly where you need to be. You are in the process of becoming, and that is a miraculous, albeit difficult, place to exist. Use this time to rest your nervous system, to reflect on your values, and to practice the art of being entirely yourself. When you eventually emerge, you will be someone who is not built on the opinions of others, but on the bedrock of your own lived experience. The loneliness you feel today is the quiet before the creation of the person you are truly meant to become. Chapter Summary. The transition phase between an old life and a new life is a silent, lonely threshold that is essential for genuine transformation. We often mistake this space for a failure of direction, but it is actually the period where you are dissolving your old identity to make room for the new. The loneliness you feel is a necessary consequence of outgrowing your old social circles and roles before finding your new alignment. Running from this loneliness by filling your life with old habits or external distractions only leads to repeating the same cycles of unhappiness. Inhabiting your loneliness allows you to develop self-reliance and the internal resources that will define your future stability. Grief is a vital component of this transition. You must allow yourself to mourn the loss of your past self and your former expectations. You are not falling behind if you feel like your progress has stalled. You are simply moving off a traditional timeline and onto one that is authentic to your soul. The chrysalis stage is a messy, dissolving process that feels like a loss of structure but is actually the most critical step in your development. Stop looking for an immediate exit and use this period to rest, reflect, and deepen your commitment to your own truth. You will emerge from this space as a person built on the foundation of your own experience rather than. Chapter 9, Why Growth Often Feels Like Loss Before It Feels Like Freedom. We are conditioned to view growth as a gain. We talk about personal development as a way to acquire new skills, new perspectives, and a new, better version of our future selves. We expect the process of transformation to feel like an accumulation of wins. Yet, anyone who has ever undergone a genuine, deep life change knows that the initial sensation of growth is not gain, it is a profound and unsettling experience of loss. To become someone new, you must systematically say goodbye to the person you were, and that process is inherently grief-filled. When you decide that you can no longer tolerate your old life, you are not just walking away from a job or a relationship. You are walking away from the version of yourself who defined their existence by those things. You are letting go of the habits that made you feel safe, the rationalizations that kept you comfortable, and the fantasies you cultivated to tolerate the intolerable. This creates a vacuum, and our human tendency is to experience that vacuum as a deficit rather than a clearing. Consider the loss of your old narratives. You may have spent years identifying as the person who always sacrifices for their family, or the person who is always struggling for money, or the person who is always looking for the next romantic savior. These identities, however limiting, provided a framework for your reality. They gave you a place in the world and a reason for your struggles. When you outgrow these identities, you lose the safety of those stories. You no longer have the script to fall back on when things get difficult. That loss of a coherent story about who you are can feel terrifying, almost like losing a part of your own existence. You will also encounter the loss of relationships that no longer fit. This is perhaps the most painful part of the process. You might realize that the people who loved you are not particularly interested in the person you are becoming. Their love was conditional on you playing a specific role, and when that role changes, the dynamic changes. You have to mourn the loss of those connections, even when you know they were stagnant or unhealthy. You are essentially grieving the death of a dynamic you shared with someone you love. That grief is real, and it is heavy, and it is a necessary part of the evolution of your life. There is also the loss of the future you expected. Most of us spend our lives building a mental picture of where we are going. We imagine ourselves in certain roles, in certain partnerships, or in certain financial situations. When you realize that your old life is incompatible with your truth, you must burn that mental map. You have to let go of the milestones you thought were important and acknowledge that the life you were working toward is no longer the life you want. This is a form of disappointment that requires its own period of mourning. You are effectively letting go of a dream that no longer holds water. This is why people can experience a deep sense of sadness even when they are making all the right choices. You might be in the middle of a positive transition, finally setting boundaries and pursuing your true purpose, and yet you wake up with a feeling of heaviness in your chest. You might feel a sense of nostalgia for a life that you know was not working. This is not a sign that you have made a mistake. It is a sign that you are human, and that you are allowing yourself to feel the weight of the change. If you do not allow this grief to surface, it will manifest as a form of resistance. You will find yourself subconsciously trying to sabotage your growth because you are trying to avoid the pain of the loss. You will keep looking backward, trying to see if there is any way to keep a piece of the old life, just to soften the blow. But you cannot build something truly new on the foundation of what you are desperately trying to preserve. You must reach a point of surrender where you accept that for the new to emerge, the old must be allowed to pass away. This is the hidden wisdom of the transformational journey. Liberation is not always immediately joyful because true freedom requires the courage to walk away from everything that once gave you a sense of identity. It is a process of stripping away the layers until you reach the core of your being. In the beginning, this feels like an amputation. It feels like you are losing pieces of yourself. But eventually, you realize that you were not losing parts of yourself, you were losing the weight of the expectations that were preventing you from seeing who you truly are. Be gentle with yourself during this time. Give yourself permission to be sad. Acknowledge the loss of the old version of you, and thank that version for its efforts to keep you safe and functioning. Honor the relationships you have outgrown, even if the ending was difficult. Celebrate the fact that you are willing to bear this grief, because it is the ultimate proof that you are prioritizing your evolution over your comfort. By the end of this process, the feeling of loss will give way to a sense of spaciousness. The void that you currently feel is not a permanent state. It is the open ground where you are beginning to plant the seeds of your real life. Grief is only fertilizer for your future. Once you have fully grieved the old, you will find that you no longer have a desire to return to it. You will find that the freedom you have been seeking has finally arrived, not because you found something new to hold on to, but because you finally found the courage to let go of everything that was holding you back. Chapter Summary. Growth feels like loss because you are stripping away the identities, relationships, and expectations that provided your sense of self, however limited. The initial stage of transformation requires you to say goodbye to the person you were, which is a process that involves deep and natural grief. You must mourn the loss of your old narratives, even if those stories were the source of your suffering, because they were your framework for reality. Letting go of relationships that no longer fit is painful, and it is normal to grieve the loss of those connections, regardless of their health or maturity. You must abandon the mental map of the future you expected, which involves a necessary mourning period for the dreams that no longer serve you. Suppressing this grief can lead to self-sabotage, as you may unconsciously try to hold on to old patterns to avoid the pain of loss. Liberation does not always feel like joy. It often starts as an amputation, removing the weight of expectations to reveal the core of your truth. Be gentle with your sadness, it is the proof that you are committed to your evolution rather than your comfort. The emptiness you feel is not a permanent state, but the open ground needed for your new life to begin to take root. Once the old is fully grieved and let go, the sense of loss transitions into the expanse. Chapter 10, The Difference Between Intuition, Fear, and Impulsive Escape. As you navigate the uncomfortable threshold of your own transformation, you will inevitably encounter the most critical question of all: is this feeling a sign that I should leave, or is it merely a sign of my own resistance? We live in an era that deeply values the idea of trusting your gut, yet we often confuse that quiet, steady inner knowing with the loud, reactive noise of our own anxiety. If you are to move forward with wisdom rather than destruction, you must learn to distinguish between the calm pull of intuition, the jagged spike of fear, and the frantic urgency of impulsive escape. Intuition is rarely a shout. It does not come with a sense of panic or a need for immediate, drastic action. Intuition is a soft, persistent realization. It is the quiet feeling that something is simply no longer right, not because you are angry, but because you have outgrown it. When your intuition speaks, it is usually accompanied by a sense of clarity and a strange, calm certainty. You do not feel the need to justify your decision to the world, nor do you feel the need to lash out at the people around you. You simply know that the time has come to shift your direction. Fear, on the other hand, is a visceral, loud, and demanding emotion. Fear is almost always focused on the negative consequences of your potential choice. It whispers that you are not good enough to succeed, that you are being ungrateful for what you have, or that you are going to lose everything if you make a change. Fear is the voice of your old identity trying to keep you trapped in the familiar. It is reactive, and it is usually born from a place of insecurity or a desire to avoid an uncomfortable feeling. If you find yourself wanting to make a change because you are terrified of what others might think, or because you are afraid of failing, you are likely listening to fear rather than intuition. Impulsive escape is something different entirely. It is the desire to burn everything down because you are overwhelmed by the intensity of your current discomfort. It is a form of emotional regulation gone wrong. You feel such a high level of frustration or irritation that you want to walk away from your responsibilities, your relationships, or your career in a single moment of catharsis. You think that if you just remove yourself from the environment, the internal pressure will vanish. But usually, when we act on an impulse to escape, we find that we have simply carried our own internal chaos into the next situation. To develop the discernment between these three, you must learn to use the tool of time. Intuition can survive a delay. If you feel that you need to make a massive change, wait for a period of time. Observe your feelings over the course of days or weeks. If the desire for change is still there after the initial wave of emotion has receded, it is more likely to be an authentic call from your intuition. If the urge to leave was driven by an impulsive need to escape the discomfort of the moment, the desire will likely fade once your nervous system has returned to a state of calm. You should also look at the physical sensation in your body. Intuition often feels like an opening. It feels like a space of possibility, a widening of your perspective, or a sense of breathing easier. Fear and impulsiveness feel like a contraction. They manifest as tightness in your chest, a knot in your stomach, a racing heart, or a narrow, desperate vision of the world. When you are acting out of fear or the desire to escape, you feel closed in, as if you are being pushed out of the door. When you are acting out of intuition, you feel as if you are stepping toward a horizon that you are finally ready to meet. It is also important to consider whether you have explored every option within your current environment. Are you leaving because you have truly outgrown the structure, or are you leaving because you are tired of doing the work required to set boundaries? Sometimes, we call a situation intolerable when we have actually just become lazy with our own self-respect. Have you clearly communicated your needs? Have you been consistent in your boundaries? Have you taken responsibility for your own emotional state rather than projecting it onto others? If you have not done these things, then your desire to leave is likely an avoidance strategy rather than a genuine shift in your evolution. Do not interpret every difficult emotion as a sign that the universe is telling you to abandon your life. Some discomfort is necessary for growth. There are seasons in our lives where we are challenged to stay and repair, to stay and learn, or to stay and build our capacity. If every time a situation became challenging you walked away, you would never develop the resilience required to inhabit a life of true consequence. Growth requires us to distinguish between the discomfort of stagnation and the discomfort of transformation. The former is a signal that you are dying in space, the latter is a signal that you are being stretched in space. Finally, ask yourself if you are moving towards something or just moving away from something. Authentic transformation is always a movement toward an internal standard. It is a decision to prioritize your own integrity, your own purpose, and your own peace. If your only goal is to be anywhere but here, you are running. If your goal is to be in a place where you can fully honor your own potential, you are evolving. By practicing this discernment, you stop being a passenger to your own emotional reactivity and start being the pilot of your own journey. You will make mistakes, and you will have moments where you realize you acted out of fear, but you will also learn to recognize the truth of your own voice. Trust the quiet. Trust the slow process of reflection. The more you learn to distinguish your own inner knowing from the noise of your reactive impulses, the more you will trust the decisions you make. You are not just changing your life, you are learning how to be someone who makes decisions with wisdom, integrity, and depth. Chapter Summary. It is vital to distinguish between the steady pull of intuition, the reactive spike of fear, and the frantic urgency of impulsive escape. Intuition is a soft, calm certainty that persists over time, whereas fear and impulsiveness are loud, demanding, and reactive. Fear is usually fueled by insecurities and the desire to avoid discomfort, while intuition is focused on growth and alignment. Impulsive escape is an attempt to regulate overwhelming emotions by burning down your current situation, which often leads to carrying chaos into your next chapter. Use time as a tool. If a desire for change persists long after the initial emotional intensity has faded, it is more likely to be an intuitive insight. Observe your physical sensations. Intuition feels like an opening and expansion, while fear and impulsiveness feel like contraction and tension. Be honest about whether your desire to leave is a reaction to an environment or an avoidance of the hard work required to set personal boundaries. Distinguish between the discomfort of stagnation, which signals a need to leave, and the discomfort of transformation, which signals a need to grow in place. Authentic transformation is a movement toward your own standards and values, rather than just an attempt to escape your current reality. Developing this discernment transforms you from a reactive participant into an intentional architect of your own. Chapter 11, When you stop negotiating against yourself. We are all expert negotiators in the arena of our own lives. We negotiate the terms of our self-respect every single day, often without realizing we are doing so. We settle for the bare minimum in our relationships because we do not want to be alone, we accept lower pay than we deserve because we fear the instability of searching for something better, and we remain silent when our values are violated because we want to maintain a superficial sense of harmony. We believe that by conceding these small points, we are protecting our future. In reality, every time we negotiate against ourselves, we are slowly eroding the foundation of our own identity. This behavior is rooted in the belief that we must trade our own needs to earn our place in the world. We feel that if we are just a little more accommodating, if we just suppress our true voice a little longer, eventually the external world will reward us with the security or the love we crave. But this logic is fundamentally flawed. When you negotiate against yourself, you are signaling to everyone around you, and most importantly to your own brain, that your needs are not the primary concern. You are teaching others exactly how much of you they are allowed to diminish. When you finally stop this cycle, it feels like a sudden, jarring change. It is not always a grand, dramatic declaration of war. Often, it is a quiet, internal decision that changes everything about your daily life. You might find yourself in a meeting where someone speaks to you with condescension, and instead of your usual habit of shrinking or laughing it off, you simply state, with calm clarity, that you expect to be spoken to with respect. You do not shout. You do not explain. You simply draw a line in the sand. This is the moment you stop negotiating against yourself. The reason this feels so frightening is that you have been using these negotiations as a form of social camouflage. You believe that by being the person who never caused trouble, who always understood, and who always compromised, you were ensuring your safety. You were making yourself easy to live with, easy to work with, and easy to overlook. When you stop doing that, you become a person who has substance, a person who has limits, and a person who cannot be easily managed. You lose the safety of invisibility. This is where the true courage of your transformation is tested. You will have to get comfortable with the fact that you will no longer be the person everyone can rely on to be the perpetual compromise. You will have to accept that your new standard of self-respect will cause temporary friction. When you stop accepting the things that repeatedly harm you, you force the environment to either adapt to your new standard or reveal that it has no room for you. Both outcomes are perfectly fine. You are no longer looking for a seat at a table that requires you to trade your soul for a chair. As you stop negotiating against yourself, you will realize how much energy you were wasting. Think of the internal dialogue you have spent years practicing, the self-justification, the mental rehearsal of excuses, the attempt to lower your own expectations so you would not be disappointed. This is an enormous drain on your vitality. When you stop trying to convince yourself that unacceptable treatment is actually okay, you reclaim all of that mental and emotional power. You suddenly find that you have the clarity to focus on your actual work, your real passions, and the relationships that are actually worth your time. This transition requires you to be honest about your own complicity. For a long time, you were a silent partner in your own diminishment. You allowed it to happen because you thought you had no other choice. But you always had a choice. You were simply choosing the path of least resistance. Now, you are choosing the path of most integrity. This is not about blaming yourself for the past, but about acknowledging that your power has always been there, waiting for you to recognize it. There is a powerful psychological shift that occurs when you decide that you are no longer open for business in the realm of self-betrayal. People will try to negotiate with you. They will try to find the version of you that used to give in. They will test your boundaries to see if you have truly changed or if this is just a temporary phase. You must stay steady. Do not justify your new standards by explaining them to death. Do not become defensive when someone is surprised by your shift. Simply hold the line. You do not need to explain why you are no longer willing to be treated poorly, you only need to ensure that you are not there to receive it. This does not mean you become rigid or unkind. It means you become a person of depth. You are choosing to honor the truth of your own experience. When you finally stop negotiating against yourself, you start to feel a sense of internal safety that no external validation can provide. You stop looking for others to confirm your value, because your own commitment to your standards is the only validation you require. You are becoming a person who exists in integrity, and that is a state of being that is entirely immune to the games others play. You are moving into a future where your yes means yes, and your no means no. This is the hallmark of a person who has reclaimed their own life. You will find that as you stop settling for less, your life begins to reflect that newfound worth. You attract better opportunities, deeper connections, and more resonant possibilities. By refusing to betray yourself, you are creating a resonance that attracts those who respect that same integrity. Stop negotiating. Start standing. The person you are becoming is not a person who compromises their core, and that, ultimately, is the greatest shift you will ever make. Chapter Summary. We negotiate against ourselves by accepting the bare minimum in relationships and work, believing this trade-off is necessary for security. Every instance of self-betrayal erodes your sense of identity and teaches others to disregard your value. Stopping this cycle often starts with small, quiet acts of asserting your standards rather than grand, dramatic confrontations. Your compliance was a form of social camouflage designed to keep you invisible and safe. Losing that invisibility is a necessary part of growth. Setting firm boundaries will cause temporary friction, forcing environments to either adapt to your worth or reveal they have no room for you. Reclaiming the mental energy previously spent on rationalizing self-betrayal provides the fuel you need for genuine passion and work. Own your role in past compromises. Acknowledging your complicity is the first step toward realizing that you have always had the power to choose differently. You will be tested. Remain consistent and steady, knowing that you do not need to justify your standards to those who are used to your compliance. Stopping self-betrayal creates an internal safety and self-validation that is far more powerful than any external approval. Refusing to negotiate against your core values shifts your reality, attracting people and opportunities that. Chapter 12. Why your relationship with money changes when your self-worth changes. We have been conditioned to view money as a separate entity, a thing that exists outside of us, governed by rules of luck, timing, or external economic forces. We think of our financial lives as a spreadsheet that operates independently of our emotional healing or our identity. But the truth is that your relationship with money is a mirror of your relationship with your own worth. If you are struggling to achieve financial clarity, it is rarely because you do not understand the math. It is because your internal sense of what you deserve, what you can demand, and what you are willing to tolerate is still shackled to your old, limited identity. When you begin the work of transforming your self-worth, the most immediate impact is not necessarily a sudden influx of cash, but a radical shift in your financial behavior. You stop undercharging for your labor because you no longer derive your sense of security from being the most affordable option. You stop overworking yourself to compensate for a deep-seated belief that you are not enough just as you are. You begin to see money as a resource that flows toward the clarity of your values, rather than a scorecard of your social standing. Many people remain stuck in a cycle of financial struggle because they are still operating with the permissions of their past. If you grew up in an environment where resources were scarce, or where the message was that money is hard to get and easy to lose, your nervous system will reflexively sabotage your success. You will unconsciously pull back whenever you get close to abundance because, on a subconscious level, you feel that you do not belong there. You might find yourself sabotaging your career, letting go of profitable opportunities, or staying in a professional role that is beneath your capability just to remain within the safe, familiar bounds of your upbringing. As you transform your identity, you must also update your financial belief system. This is not about the hollow promise of positive thinking, where you simply wish for prosperity. It is about the practical courage to align your actions with your new, higher standard. It means having the courage to walk away from a client who does not respect your work. It means having the discipline to save, not out of a fear of poverty, but out of a respect for your future self. It means having the boundaries to say no to requests that drain your capacity without adding value to your life or your goals. Your relationship with money is also deeply tied to your willingness to be visible. Many people choose to stay small because they are afraid of the judgment that comes with success. They fear that if they earn more, they will be perceived as greedy, or they will be expected to support everyone else, or they will lose their connection to the people they love. This is a fear of the responsibility of abundance. When you commit to your own worth, you have to accept that you are no longer the person who blends into the background. You are choosing to occupy space, and that requires you to be comfortable with the light shining on your work, your choices, and your life. Transformation also changes the way you view work. When your self-worth is tied to your identity rather than your productivity, you stop treating every dollar as a battle for your soul. You begin to treat your career as a deliberate act of service and skill. You stop negotiating from a place of desperation and start negotiating from a place of contribution. When you know what you bring to the table, and you are not looking for the other person to confirm that value, the entire power dynamic of a business transaction shifts. You stop asking for permission and start presenting value. This is the difference between an employee and a master of one's craft. You must also recognize that abundance is tied to responsibility. It is not a cosmic reward for suffering. It is the result of taking the actions that move you toward your potential, even when those actions are scary or require you to learn new skills. You have to move from a passive, waiting posture to an active, participating one. This means educating yourself, managing your resources with intelligence, and being willing to fail in the pursuit of something better. You are the steward of your own prosperity, and that stewardship begins with the moment you decide that you are worth the effort it takes to manage your financial life. Do not let the pursuit of money become a new form of obsession that replaces your old patterns of self-betrayal. The goal is not to be wealthy, the goal is to be free. Wealth is a tool for that freedom, but it is not the definition of it. If you spend your life chasing money at the cost of your peace, your relationships, or your character, you have not succeeded. You have simply changed the currency of your own compromise. Ensure that your pursuit of financial stability is always in service of a life that is truly yours, not one that is designed to impress a world that never cared about your soul. As you move forward, examine your financial triggers. When you feel anxious about a purchase, or when you hesitate to ask for what your work is worth, pause and ask yourself, what part of my old identity is speaking right now? Is it the part of me that believes I am not enough, or is it the part of me that is ready to step into a new, more expansive version of my life? You have the power to redefine your reality. It is a slow, methodical process of proving to yourself, through your own actions, that you are someone who deserves to live a life of possibility. The money will eventually follow the integrity of your actions, but you must be willing to do the work of changing your internal world first. Chapter Summary. Your relationship with money is a direct reflection of your relationship with your own worth and identity. Financial struggle is often the result of outdated beliefs and survival strategies that keep you subconsciously attached to your past. Transforming your self-worth leads to healthier financial behaviors, such as charging what you are worth and stopping the cycle of overworking. You must consciously update your financial belief system to replace scarcity mindsets with a commitment to your new, higher standards. Fear of visibility and the responsibility that comes with success often keep people trapped in small, unfulfilling financial realities. Shifting your identity allows you to negotiate from a place of contribution rather than desperation, changing your professional power dynamics. Abundance requires a move from passive waiting to active, responsible stewardship of your own potential and resources. Do not replace one form of compromise with another. Ensure your financial goals remain in service of your overall peace and character. Examine your financial anxieties to identify whether they stem from your past conditioning or your present capacity for growth. The goal is not just wealth, but freedom. Build a financial reality that supports an authentic. Chapter 13, You cannot build a new life with old permissions. There is a silent trap that catches almost everyone during the process of profound personal transformation. You have done the internal work. You have identified what you can no longer tolerate, you have grieved the loss of your old self, and you have set your sights on a horizon that is much wider than the one you left behind. Yet, you find yourself stuck at the starting line. You feel as though you are waiting for something to happen before you can truly claim your new life. You are waiting for the world to notice, for the people in your life to accept your change, or for a sense of total certainty to wash over you. In short, you are waiting for permission. This is the psychological hangover of childhood and the lingering shadow of our social conditioning. We spend the first part of our lives asking for permission to be, to grow, to speak, and to move. We wait for teachers, parents, employers, and partners to tell us that we are doing the right thing, that we are allowed to want more, and that we are safe to move into the unknown. When we reach adulthood, we often unconsciously continue this pattern. We feel that we need the world to validate our evolution before we are truly entitled to it. But here is the stark truth that you must internalize. Adulthood is the transition from being a person who asks for permission to being the person who grants it. You are currently waiting for permissions that will never arrive. You are waiting for your parents to tell you that it is okay to be different. You are waiting for your friends to agree that your new boundaries are fair. You are waiting for your employer to validate your worth so you can finally feel like you belong in a position of authority. You are waiting for the universe to show you a sign that you have earned the right to exist on your own terms. But the universe does not grant permission. It only presents opportunities. You are the only one who can sign the document that gives you the right to occupy your own life. Consider the specific permissions you have been withholding from yourself. Have you granted yourself permission to disappoint others to honor your own needs? Have you granted yourself permission to be visible, to be seen, and to be potentially misunderstood? Have you granted yourself permission to rest when you are tired, rather than when you have finished every task on a never-ending list? Have you granted yourself permission to pursue a standard of excellence that others might find intimidating? These are the foundational building blocks of your new life, and if you do not grant them to yourself, you will remain trapped in the architecture of your past. This is why many people who begin the journey of transformation never actually complete it. They change their clothes, they change their habits, and they even change their environment, but they keep the same internal operating system. They are still looking for external validation for their every move. They are still apologizing for their success. They are still treating their own dreams as secondary to the needs of the people who knew them when they were small. If you try to build a new life with these old permissions, you are not building anything new at all. You are just renovating an old, crumbling house and expecting it to feel like a palace. The act of granting yourself permission is an act of sovereign authority. It is the moment you acknowledge that your life is your own responsibility. It is not an act of arrogance, it is an act of stewardship. When you grant yourself permission to grow, you are not saying that you are better than others. You are saying that you have finally accepted the role of primary architect in your own existence. This shift feels heavy because it removes the safety net of blame. You can no longer blame your parents, your partner, your boss, or the economy for your limitations. You are now the one in charge. Start with small permissions. Today, give yourself permission to end a conversation that feels draining without justifying your exit. Give yourself permission to say no to an invitation that does not resonate with your spirit. Give yourself permission to prioritize your own creative work over the needs of others. These small acts of self-authorization act as a training ground for your nervous system. You are teaching yourself that you are the authority of your own experience. With every small permission, you weaken the grip of the old conditioning that taught you to be small, silent, and compliant. Do not expect this to feel comfortable. Because you are breaking the patterns of your entire history, you will experience a surge of internal guilt. You will feel as though you are doing something forbidden. You will expect the world to react with anger, or you will expect a disaster to strike as a punishment for your boldness. Observe this guilt, but do not let it dictate your behavior. The guilt is just the echo of the old system that wanted you to stay small. It is not a warning of danger. It is a sign that you are doing exactly what you need to be doing. You are the one you have been waiting for. There is no external authority that can give you the life you want. There is no special combination of events that will suddenly make you feel ready. You are ready when you decide that the cost of staying the same has finally exceeded the cost of being who you truly are. It is time to stop waiting for the world to notice your value. It is time to act like you already have it. It is time to sign the documents of your own liberation and step into the life that has been waiting for you to authorize its beginning. Chapter Summary. We often remain stuck in transformation because we are waiting for external permission to fully inhabit our new lives. Adulthood is defined by the transition from being a person who asks for permission to being the person who grants it to themselves. You cannot build a fundamentally new life while still relying on the validation, approval, and standards of your old self. Granting yourself permission is an act of sovereign authority and necessary stewardship of your own potential. Withholding permission from yourself is a form of self-betrayal that keeps you trapped in the limited architecture of your past. This shift removes the safety net of blame, forcing you to accept full responsibility for your existence and your choices. Practice granting yourself small, daily permissions to build the psychological muscle required for larger life changes. Do not be surprised by the surge of guilt that accompanies self-authorization, it is merely the echo of your old conditioning. There is no external authority coming to rescue you or authorize your success, you are the one you have been waiting for. Acting as if you already possess your own worth, without waiting for the world to confirm it, is the true catalyst for your new. Chapter 14, The Life You Want Requires a Different Standard. We often speak of standards as if they were lofty goals or distant aspirations, something we will eventually reach when the circumstances of our lives finally align. We imagine that success is a destination that will automatically grant us a higher quality of existence. But the truth is the exact inverse. You do not reach a higher standard by waiting for your life to change. You reach a higher standard by changing the way you live your life today. A standard is not a destination. A standard is a decision that you make every single moment of your day, expressed through your choices, your boundaries, and your actions. The life you want requires a different standard than the life you have outgrown. This is the hardest reality of transformation to accept because it means that you cannot continue to participate in the world the way you once did. You cannot expect to build a life of profound respect while continuing to tolerate environments where you are consistently diminished. You cannot expect to build a life of financial abundance while continuing to handle your resources with the same fear-based habits of your past. You cannot expect to build a life of deep, soulful connection while continuing to invest your energy in relationships that are built on superficiality or neglect. A new standard is lived through consistency. It is the boring, unglamorous, and repetitive work of saying no to the things that no longer match your value. It is the act of showing up for yourself when no one else is watching. When you decide that your standard is one of clarity and peace, you suddenly have to become very disciplined about how you spend your time. You have to be willing to be the person who leaves a conversation early because it has become negative. You have to be the person who holds a difficult boundary with a family member, even when it feels uncomfortable. These moments are not isolated incidents, they are the cumulative building blocks of your new reality. The reason most people fail to achieve their desired transformation is that they try to build a new life using the old standards. They want a better job, but they are not willing to change their standard of professional communication. They want a healthier relationship, but they are not willing to change their standard of emotional honesty. They want more peace, but they are not willing to change their standard of how much chaos they are willing to allow into their home. You cannot graft a high standard onto a low standard foundation. You have to clear the ground. You have to be willing to let go of the behaviors that are incompatible with the person you are becoming. This requires a radical level of honesty. Look at your life as it stands right now. Where are your standards slipping? Where are you choosing convenience over character? Where are you choosing the comfort of being liked over the strength of being respected? These are not judgments, they are diagnostics. If you want a different result, you have to be willing to look at the process. If you want a different life, you have to be willing to be a different person. You are the variable in the equation. When you change the variable, the outcome shifts. A high standard is often lonely at first. Because you are no longer playing by the old rules, you will feel out of sync with the world around you. You will find others are still comfortable with the compromises you have abandoned. You will see people settling for less, and you will be tempted to join them because it is easier to be average than to be excellent in your own self-care. Stay the course. Excellence is not about being better than others, it is about being true to the potential you have identified within yourself. It is a private promise that you make to your own soul. This standard also requires patience. You will not see the results of your new life overnight. Building a life of integrity takes time. It is a slow, methodical process of proving to yourself that you are committed to your new values. There will be days when you want to revert to the old way of doing things, when you want to take the path of least resistance. On those days, remember that the discomfort of holding your standard is the price you pay for the freedom you are building. It is a bargain that is always worth it. You also have to recognize that your standards apply to how you treat others, not just how you expect to be treated. If you want a life of kindness, you must hold yourself to a standard of kindness. If you want a life of excellence, you must hold yourself to a standard of excellence. Your transformation is an invitation to embody the qualities you wish to see in your world. You are not a victim of your circumstances, you are the creator of your environment. Every interaction you have is an opportunity to assert the standard you have chosen. As you go about your week, treat your standard as a non-negotiable agreement with your future self. When you are faced with a choice, ask yourself, does this align with the standard of the person I am becoming? If the answer is no, you have your direction. It does not matter how difficult the choice is. It does not matter what others might think. All that matters is the integrity of your own path. By consistently choosing the higher standard, you are not just reaching for a better life, you are proving that you are already living it. The life you want is not coming, it is being built, brick by brick, standard by standard, every single day. Chapter Summary. A standard is not a future destination, it is a current decision expressed through your daily choices, boundaries, and actions. You cannot build a new life on the foundation of old, low standards. Consistency is required to bridge the gap between who you were and who you are becoming. Building a life of respect, abundance, or peace requires you to systematically abandon the behaviors that are incompatible with those outcomes. Transformation requires a radical level of honesty to identify where you are still choosing convenience or the desire to be liked over your own integrity. Holding a new standard can feel lonely, as you will be operating on a different frequency than those who are still comfortable with old compromises. The discomfort of maintaining a higher standard is a necessary cost of the freedom and alignment you are working to achieve. Patience is essential, as the results of your new standards will not appear immediately. Trust the slow process of building character. Your standards must be reciprocal, you must embody the qualities you demand from others, as you are the primary creator of your environment. Every choice is an opportunity to reinforce your commitment to your future self. Ask yourself if your actions align with your desired identity. The life you want is being constructed right now, in the present, through the integrity of the standard. Chapter 15, When you finally become unavailable for your old life. We began this journey by discussing a strange, internal restlessness. We explored the quiet moments when the life you built started to feel like a costume that no longer fit. We navigated the difficult terrain of grieving your past, the loneliness of the threshold, the resistance of your own nervous system, and the challenge of establishing standards that reflect the person you are becoming. Now, we arrive at the final station of this transformation. This is not a destination where you are suddenly perfect or where the world finally gives you everything you desire. Instead, it is a state of being where you finally become unavailable for the life you have outgrown. There is a profound difference between forcing yourself to change and embodying a change that has already taken root. In the beginning, you had to consciously remind yourself to set boundaries. You had to struggle to stay consistent with your new values. You had to fight the urge to return to the familiar. But something happens as you continue to show up for your own truth, the effort begins to dissolve. You reach a point where you no longer need to be convinced that your old patterns are bad for you. You simply know that they are incompatible with who you are. You reach a state of unavailability. This unavailability is not an act of arrogance or a defensive posture. It is a state of natural alignment. Just as you do not have to struggle to decide whether or not you will walk through a fire, you no longer have to struggle to decide whether or not you will tolerate disrespect, compromise your peace, or neglect your own potential. The options that once tempted you, the drama, the smallness, the codependency, the hustle for approval, no longer hold any currency. They are simply not part of the landscape you inhabit. You have become unavailable for the life that required you to be less than you are. This is the quiet sign that your transformation is complete. It is not marked by a victory parade or a sudden change in your bank account. It is marked by the silence of your own internal debate. When a person from your past attempts to draw you back into an old dynamic, you do not feel a sense of struggle. You feel a sense of clarity. You do not have to launch into a long explanation of your growth. You simply exist in your current reality, and that reality does not have space for the old pattern. You have become like a tree that has grown too wide for the fence that once constrained it. You are no longer contained by the boundaries that used to dictate your reach. As you look back on this journey, realize that you did not get here by chance. You got here by the deliberate, often painful work of honoring your own discomfort. You listened when your soul whispered that the status quo was no longer enough. You had the courage to walk through the dark, lonely spaces where you had to learn how to be your own company. You developed the resilience to soothe your own nervous system when it panicked at the prospect of a new, healthy reality. You did the work of granting yourself the permissions you spent a lifetime waiting for others to provide. All of this has led you to this moment of sovereignty. You are now a person who understands that your life is not a fixed set of circumstances, but a dynamic, ever-evolving expression of your values. You understand that your peace is the greatest asset you possess, and that no amount of external belonging or material success is worth the sacrifice of your own integrity. You have learned that your worth is not a negotiation, but a foundational fact. You are a person who can withstand the temporary friction of change because you know that the long-term outcome is an existence that is truly, authentically yours. As you close this book, know that the path forward is not meant to be traveled with the same intensity of struggle you have experienced during this transition. You have done the foundational work. You are now entering a phase of expansion. Your focus should not be on what you are leaving behind, but on what you are preparing to receive. When you are no longer available for the things that diminish you, you open a massive amount of space for the things that nourish you. You will find that you have more energy, more creativity, and more capacity for genuine connection than you have ever had before. There will still be challenges. There will still be moments of doubt and seasons of intense growth. But you are no longer the person who is afraid of those things. You are the person who understands them. You are the person who can look at a problem, acknowledge the discomfort, and choose the path that honors your commitment to your own potential. You are no longer waiting for the universe to change your life. You have realized that the universe changes your life by first changing your tolerance, and through that change, you have become the architect of your own destiny. Go forward with the quiet confidence of someone who has finally come home to themselves. Trust your intuition, hold your standards, and continue to grant yourself the permission to grow in ways that you cannot yet imagine. You have navigated the strange threshold between who you were and who you are becoming, and you have survived it. You have shed the skin that was keeping you small, and you are ready to walk into the light of your own authentic life. The old version of you is gone, and the new version of you is just beginning to breathe. You are finally, fully, and completely available for the life you were meant to live. Chapter Summary. Transformation is complete when you move from consciously struggling to change to naturally embodying a reality that makes your old patterns impossible. Becoming unavailable for your old life is not an act of arrogance but a state of alignment where old dynamics no longer match your frequency. The sign of genuine growth is the silence of your internal debate. You no longer struggle with the temptation of old, harmful cycles. Your unavailability for diminishment is the ultimate evidence that you have reclaimed your sovereignty and your worth. The hard work of navigating discomfort, loneliness, and transition has built the foundation of your new, resilient identity. You have transitioned from a person who relies on external validation to a person who operates from the bedrock of their own values. By letting go of what you have outgrown, you create a massive, fertile space for the things that will nourish and expand your potential. Challenges will still arise, but you are now equipped with the wisdom to view them as opportunities for growth rather than crises of identity. You are no longer waiting for the universe to change your life. You are the active participant who has redefined what they are willing to tolerate. You are finally home to yourself, fully available for the life you were meant to live, and ready to continue your expansion.